The world is a college of corporations, inexorably determined by the immutable bylaws of business. The world is a business. And I have chosen you to preach this evangel.
For all my free market healthcare robbing, stock stealing, retirement fund fucking with niggas. Fuck you little credit card scamming, jewelry stealing, crack selling, liquor store robbing motherfuckers. Shout to the homies, Carnegie, OG, Willie Randolph Hearst, Baruch, Rockefeller, the real Rockefeller, my main bitch Leona, pour out a little Louis XIII, Scott Rothstein, Jack Abramoff, hold your head, my real top niggas, let's get this money. I spend my day peppering America overseas, pension for the workers, nigga please, embezzlement, etiquette, private settlement, I'm better with Confederate rhetoric from my mansion in Connecticut, foreclose of it, close out the tenement, I twist words like a speech impediment, I hope you got good credit, bitch, if not, better get a new job with benefits, while I play golf with niggas to get cheddar with, new money buys brand new carrots, my old money bunch of great grandparents, you got grills in your mouth, I ain't mad at you, I own every gold mine in South Africa, thanks baby, you made me $1 billion, plus I own a building, for each one of my children's children.
Welcome, everybody, to Voice of Rebellion Radio. This is Chris J., your host. Sergio, can you hear me?
I am, yes, I can hear you.
Okay, first, I guess the way to start off the show, best way, it seems like the situation that we found ourselves in the last, month or two, that now Syria's kind of taken the spotlight on, what a lot of the world's focused on. And Syria and also, as well, I guess you could say North Korea is also, a lot of the world has paid their attention to them. And I feel like the Ukraine has faded out of the spotlight. And now not too many people are even as concerned as they were about Ukraine. But the war continues going on. And has there been any... I've actually lost track of some of what's going on in Ukraine. But has there been much large-scale fighting in the last couple months? Or... is it kind of just like little skirmishes here and there? How could you just best describe the situation in Ukraine right now?
Well, I would describe it as stable, maybe stably aggressive. Of course, there's not as much fighting as it was at the beginning of the conflict. Now it's much less fighting, but still people are dying every single day. The Ukrainian army just last week and a couple of days ago tried to make some kind of offensive. They, of course, wasn't successful because by that time the Republic's armies was able to build a few lines of good defenses, But I think it was just a provocation. It was offensive for the sake of taking territory. They were supposed to withdraw heavy hardware from the military line. And what it was, I think it was just a provocation to sabotage that withdrawal, to have the situation, as I said, stable aggressive.
Yeah, there's been, that's the thing is that I've seen it seems like it's more like a stalemate at this point, which kind of resembles some of the other, what they call the frozen conflicts that seem to be in Eastern Europe. You have what happened in Georgia, South Ossetia, Abkhazia, and also, what happened with Transnistria. There's just kind of I feel like East Ukraine's kind of fallen into that status, that these countries are not really recognized by too many countries. They're kind of in a frozen status, but they're not really ruled by the country that they're trying to liberate themselves from. For example, Transnistria is pretty much autonomous, that little strip of land from the rest of Moldova. I feel like that's kind of the same for the Donbass region, but at the same time, they're still susceptible to provocations and different attacks coming from Kiev, similar to what, over there, the people of Transnistria, they kind of have a similar status as well. And, only a few countries right now officially recognize East Ukraine. And I feel like that will change eventually. However, do you really see much change in the situation happening when it comes to the recognition, when it comes to freedom of the lands from Kiev coming the next couple of years or so? Or do you think it'll be like what's happened in Georgia, where the situation pretty much stood still for 10 years, or in Transnistria? Now it seems to have been about 20 years since the original conflict. and they still have pretty much the same status that they have had for that entire time. They haven't really became part of politically normalized their government. That's one thing I fear will happen to the Lugansk People's Republic and the Donetsk People's Republic, is despite their ability and they'll be able to govern their own regions effectively, that the rest of the world will never really normalize their political legitimacy, and they'll remain a obscure country.
Well, from the point where we're standing today, of course, it looks like it will be a frozen conflict for the long years ahead of us. But you see the places you mentioned. Yes, there are. You could call it a frozen conflict. But in Transnistria, in South Ossetia, in Abkhazia, no war. People not dying every single day. No firefights, no shelling, no nothing. The peacekeepers from one side, peacekeepers from the other side, and the place is relatively peaceful. Of course, there is some political tension. Some maybe hard talk, but war is not going on there. That's the most important thing. And for the people in Donbass now, after the 3 years of war, after the 3 years of really suffering, the most important thing for the war to stop. The question of political recognition, of political life, it's all not as important as it could be after the war would stop. All this question could be processed after the war would stop. That's the main point. The main objective for the people.
Main concern is the end bloodshed, so innocent civilians no longer being killed, and just for living in that region. In Donbass, we've had over 10,000 people have died from this war. Many innocent civilians, and you're right. It'd be a lot better. The people of Lugansk, people of Donetsk, they wish that they could be at the same level of Transnistria, or over in Georgia, the South Abkhazia and South Ossetia. They could be, live in at least general peace compared to uncertainty and violence and many other problems. And even in West Ukraine, they've had there's a lot of violence due to the right-wing thugs, and there's internal fighting. And it's really a mess in the entire country, not even just the eastern part, but the eastern part has taken the brunt as the Western Ukrainian military is sanctioning the violence, sanctioning war against the entire region from Donetsk to Lugansk. And there's been fighting outside those two areas as well. There's been heavy fighting, however, inside of these cities in the last few years, Donetsk especially. The airport was destroyed, I remember, at one point, and there's been large bombs. It's a civil war, and it's kind of weird how it's completely out of the spotlight, especially in a European country. You think that they would have covered it more. It's the last time that really anything of this magnitude happened I can think of was maybe Yugoslavia in 1999, and hopefully it doesn't end with the same result of that, where the United States and NATO intervened, causing the bloodshed of even more innocent people. And with Bill Clinton's, it's a lot of people like to say in America that Bill Clinton didn't have Iraq, or didn't have, Obama, like Bush did, or Obama had Libya, and that Clinton had Yugoslavia. That was his major horrific act that happened under his administration, and his name is definitely not clean. Like any of the presidents going back to JFK, every president seems to have his own, bloody trophy, whether it was LBJ in Vietnam, and then Nixon was just a continuation of that. You go to Carter, he started the bloody policies of Afghanistan with supporting the Mujahideen. Ronald Reagan, he had the Iraq-Iran war, which he financed both sides of the war. Well, the people in charge of them did, and his administration was caught giving weapons to both sides of the war. Then you had H.W. with Iraq, and then Bill was Yugoslavia. You see this continuation, all different presidents. And now Donald, it seems Syria and Iran is going to be his bloody trophies. Potentially Venezuela, it seems, is that there's been continuing tension. And, one thing that's good I've seen is that despite how different the regions and the cultures of these countries, where there's different struggles against imperialism, is that there seems to be a solidarity between the countries, from Venezuela to Ukraine to Syria. Despite how different each country's culture is, and how how different they seem from each other, is that ultimately it seems that the people and also a lot of the supporters of these countries have stood together in shaming the Western imperialist attacks on these countries and, the coup attempts and regime change policy that ultimately, in Ukraine, they replaced Yankovic with a fascist dictator successfully. In Venezuela, they're trying to replace Maduro with Capriles Radonsky, who ultimately, in his opposition, which ultimately are covert fascists. And then you have in Syria trying to replace Assad with an Islamist dictatorship. This is not anything new for the United States, regime change policy. However, when it comes to the idea that any politician or president, I think that what was sad is that we saw in around the election, a lot of people pinning their hopes, and it was the same thing with a lot of people that were hoping for a peaceful solution in Syria, that Donald Trump would somehow change the policies for how they would deal with Ukraine. And now that he's became the president, there seems to be no real change, and there's definitely no real change in Syria. In fact, I think he intensified the push for regime change. We've had in the last week 2 attacks on Entente against the Syrian military from the United States. There's now been 3 strikes in the last 3 weeks. We're definitely seeing a pattern of continued aggression of the Assad government. So my question is that do you think that in your personal opinion and also with the people there, do you think that any hope that the United States government is going to take a different direction has faded away with Donald Trump's Donald Trump's turn from going, he seemed somewhat anti-establishment as a candidate and then became the president, and he seemed to be one more of the establishment, another neocon. Has the hope that Donald Trump could change anything went away for the people of Ukraine?
Well, of course, my personal opinion, of course, there's still a small bit, but still hope, And let's face it, Donald Trump was in power little over than 100 days, and all these days he was deeply confronted by all establishment, and even if he wanted to do something, to change something, he didn't really have a chance to do something. He opposed from his own party till every last probably the most people in Congress. Also, I don't really see how he could get off it, But I still hope, of course, and people hope that the change would come.
Well, there was and not only I think was these 2 situations and the people involved with these 2 situations where people really relying their hope, are putting a lot of hope on the potential of a change with the new administration. It wasn't just Syria and Ukraine. I feel also when it comes to Russia as a whole, Vladimir Putin, I think there was a lot of hope that there'd be a solve in this new Cold War with Donald Trump's arrival, and that Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump could make some kind of agreements towards lasting peace. However, what we've seen is as the Russian government described it, is that the relationship between Russia and the United States has been permanently damaged. That was the thing about Trump, is that it seemed that when it came to foreign policy, he was not uttering the globalist gibberish about what needed to be done. And some of the stuff actually seemed kind of pragmatic, but at the same time keeping the idea of a relationship with Saudi Arabia, or also his talk about how we need to defend Israel even more than we had in the past, were big red flags to people that really pay attention. And now that you see Donald Trump, he's visited Saudi Arabia, is that when it comes to the Middle East, there's definitely no hope that he's going to change the policy of the Middle East. When it comes to Russia versus the United States, I still think that it's limited. However, of course, there's always hope. I feel like, though, more of the hope that might rely for the Ukrainian people of a change of the situation, it's going to be potentially maybe in their European neighbors, Germany, France, other countries in the future, that it may a type of rapprochement of hoping to barter some kind of deal, with Russia and countries that might be thinking twice before taking a very anti-Russia stance because of their proximity, they might work with Russia to try to end the Ukrainian situation peacefully. I think that's honestly with Germany, there's a chance because I've seen that Germany knows that their economy would probably do better under BRICS, under the Russian, while partnering with Russia more than trying to work with a failing petrodollar system with the United States and the United States failing economic prospects. At the same time, I think that also the UK, with now, that was a massive move forward, is that with Theresa May, looks like her future is very uncertain, and now that Jeremy Corbyn may become the new prime minister, at least at some point in the future, or that he'll have a lot of prominence over the politics of Ukraine, that with a more sane face in the United Kingdom's government, if they allow that sane face to stay around, if they don't try to remove them, whether it's by political upheaval or whether they try to remove them via assassination, maybe the UK might also be a part of this situation. My opinion, I think that's more reasonable because I don't see any real change coming from Trump, but I could see it potentially coming from the European Union and European Union's countries trying to work with Russia more because they see the failing of their own system, is that the EU seems to be falling apart. It's only a matter of time. I mean, Le Pen might have not won the 2017 election in France, which a lot of people would say would have signaled the end of the European Union. She might have lost by 30%, but she still put up a lot bigger numbers than I think some people expected. In her run, even coming in second was a massive shift, and it was no longer politics as usual, it seemed like, in France. And I think the same way with Corbyn's near victory the other day, is that with Corbyn, but now ultimately the Labour Party is right there, just real close, and now it's Corbyn's Labour Party as well, mind you. It's not Blair's Labour Party. At least what Corbyn talks seems to be one of the most radical changes in foreign policy than any Western politician. And Corbyn is very intriguing. So I think that within the European Union, countries that are leaving the European Union in the next few years, maybe Spain, a few other countries, maybe they might be part of bartering some kind of deal between the East and West when it comes to Ukraine. And that may perhaps the United States also, another potential, I say potential, is that maybe that the United States will take a hands-off approach on Ukraine and stop aiding the West Ukrainian government. But I don't think it's going to happen. I think there's always going to be secret aid. There's always going to be help from CIA or whatnot. But I only feel like that would happen if they really feel like it's unsalvageable, or that Syria has taken a higher prominence, aka, like a war started in Syria, and now they figure that they need to only work with the Syrian rebels. They really need to adjust their priorities. There's a few situations where I think that it does look better than it does look worse when it comes to the different situations that could happen when it comes to Ukraine. I don't really see it getting, I don't really see like a massive shift in how the West views the Lugansk Donetsk People's Republic, their recognition and whatnot. But I do see potentials for deals being made with Russia as more countries. I could see that people are fearing the Russian bear. They know that they're right there. They know that in a war, if war was ever to break out, those Western European countries would be probably taken over by the time the United States would actually come in to aid them. So they're going to be very cautious in how they deal with this. I think France, Germany, those kind of countries Eastern Ukrainian governments will be able to look to in order to help barter some kind of peace deal. But another question, and this is going a little bit different, is that there's a lot of instability in the EU. There's a lot of instability in the West, but there's also a lot of instability in Western Ukraine. In Kiev, there's a lot of infighting between the different nationalists, and more nationalist groups are fighting with the lesser nationalist groups. Do you think that Poroshenko will step down at some point, or do you think there'll be a total collapse of the Kiev government in the upcoming years?
No, I don't think Poroshenko would step down. I tell you more, he's planning to run for the second term, and believe it or not, he might have a good chances to win second term presidency, but not because he is popular politician, but because of there's no real opposition to him. Every more or less capable opposition was destroyed. Political figures who was more or less popular from the opposition camp was executed or expelled or jailed. So there's no one really to run against him. So he by himself he wouldn't step down. The only way to make this process slow, painful, but to make Ukrainian people understand themselves what they elected and what become of all of this. By now, the right-wing ideology, the openly Nazi ideology, is too popular, and the masses, and especially between the elite of Ukraine. And until it is popular, until it is supported, especially supported from the outside, it will be very hard to overcome.
Yeah. Well, I feel like because these people that live in Western Ukraine, they believe that Poroshenko's kind of led them through a difficult time. So they're going to probably look to Poroshenko they're going to look to Poroshenko to lead them through what they see as the country being on onslaught from as the propaganda in Ukraine. They believe that the liberation fighters in Eastern Ukraine are like Russian terrorists, so they believe that Russia is attacking the country via these proxies. But in reality, that's not true. However, they believe the propaganda. They believe that Poroshenko and probably Poroshenko will probably win another term, unfortunately. And I think that though there is a lot of infighting, there's a lot of instability in Western Ukraine that will have to be dealt with. A lot of the more far-right nationalist groups disapprove of Poroshenko. A lot of course, Ukraine as a whole, the country is in absolute country. I mean, the country does not like him. I don't think that he's really that popular, but I think that at the same time that they feel like he's necessary. Is that a lot of the people in Western Ukraine believe that he's the person that can lead them through the war, through also the economic problems that have been going on in Western Ukraine and across Ukraine because of the war and because of in Eastern Ukraine because the Western Ukraine is trying to blockade them, and that's part of the reason why there's so much suffering. Is because of these because of the blockade that they're placing on Eastern Ukraine. I really hope that I really hope that the Russia, I think that ultimately Russia is going to have the biggest role in determining Ukraine's future. And the thing is that they're playing very cautious. They know the United States fingerprints are there. They know that the United States is helping the West Ukrainian regime and with assistance and training and whatnot. And they know that the United States is crazy enough in order to do something about any kind of potential Russian interference in Ukraine. They've been already trying to put that narrative on the mainstream media, on the news, and it's been laughed at by the Russians. However, if they were ever to enter past the Crimea into Ukraine, I think that we can expect to see a very frenzied United States response, and it might not lead to War 3, but Russia doesn't want to deal with it, and I think that's why they're being so cautious. They've been very cautious with Syria. Is that if the Russians really wanted to eliminate ISIS, they could send in 30,000 Russian soldiers, and they would be gone in 2 weeks or something like that. But however, the Russian military cannot go into Syria past a certain point because the United States military will scream bloody murder, and the United States government will scream bloody murder. So it's not going to happen. There will never be a full-out assault, I don't think, in Syria unless we're like in War 3 by the Russians. The Iranians.
Of course not. Let me remind you that the United States and some other Western countries were trying already to call for the more sanctions on Russia because of Syrian involvement. It's going to absurd, but there was calls like that.
the Russians have already been so cautious because of that, is that they get sanctioned for not even being there. 1,200 soldiers, 1,800 soldiers, whatever amount of Russian soldiers are actually there, they're getting sanctioned for that. So,
just think this idea through. To get sanctions for fighting terrorists, that's bloody absurd. Sorry, but just unbelievable,
Well, yeah, and they try to spin it around that they're attacking the moderate rebels as well, but there are no moderate rebels in Syria. The moderate rebels are also sided with the terrorists, they're sided with Al Qaeda, they're sided with Al Nusra, which is just pretty much the Syrian Al Qaeda, and they're sided with ISIS themselves. The ISIS is ultimately a CIA creation, and it's funny how you see this start to bleed through. The truth starts to bleed through of what ISIS actually is every now and then on the mainstream, on the coverage of the war. On the mainstream media, they've kept it pretty good quiet of what ISIS is, but when it comes to other media, you see like reports where there was ISIS apologized to Israel or something for striking one of their planes. Why would they apologize to one of their supposed enemies? At the same time, you see other examples where like the United States attacks where the United States attacks the Syrian military while attacking ISIS, like what happened last year at the Deir el-Zor. And now we've had 4 strikes or whatever this year. And these were all intentional. These weren't an accident like they tried to claim back in 2016. I wonder how accidental that actually was. It's the same thing when it comes to the ridiculousness of how they sanction Russia for their involvement in Ukraine when these people that are in West Ukraine, literally the European Union had just sanctioned them as or had labeled them as right-wing extremist Nazis, the Svoboda Party, and now they have a lot of them have high positions of power. Shouldn't that be alarming? But now they're going to act like that's not a big deal. And in fact, it's that just a few years ago, they used to take a lot more extreme stances on certain things than they used to. When it came to Jews as a whole, Svoboda wasn't exactly friendly to them. But however, now it's kind of ironic, isn't that nowadays one of the biggest supporters of the West Ukrainian regime is Israel. You think that Israel would never support any type of country with such connections to neo-Nazism. However, that's not how it really is. And if you really look at the history, is that Nazism and Zionism have a lot more in common and a lot more connection to each other than you would believe. It's very interesting, to say the least, the reasoning behind the United States foreign policy and how they pick and choose their enemies. And is that Saudi Arabia is not considered an extremist state, but Iran is. And you have Syrian rebels are not considered to be extreme, but Hezbollah is considered to be extreme. People that literally fight ISIS, and they've been one of the biggest fighters of terrorist groups across the Middle East for years. Hezbollah has been a major combatant of Salafist terrorism, while Saudi Arabia has backed Salafist terrorism, and the Syrian rebels are definitely cozy with it. Same thing in the very weird policies of Europe is that you have there's such a strong stance against Russia, and they call them intolerant, they call them bigoted, and many other things. And at the same time, they back Saudi Arabia, and they back very intolerant regimes that literally throw gays off of rooftops like they do in Saudi Arabia. The United States will back them, and they might even support them in the same speech. They'll support Saudi Arabia, but at the same time will denounce Russia as being bigoted or hateful. The mainstream media has a way of spinning everything around and making the oppressed look like the oppressors and the oppressors look like the oppressed. And that's a little bit of what's going on here. And they have the people, they make it seem like that the government of West Ukraine are the victims and that the West Ukrainians are suffering from Russian-backed terrorism, but really it's the East Ukraine suffering from United States-backed terrorism and a state that sponsors that terrorism, which is West Ukraine, and they've actually formed a government of these Nazi terrorists. And people say that's an exaggeration to call them terrorists, but let's remember what happened on May 2nd, 2014, Odessa. Let's remember what's happened in multiple different situations in Ukraine, and these horrific acts have been committed by West Ukrainian soldiers or West Ukrainian supporters, Azov Battalion, different paramilitary groups that are in support of West Ukraine. What's funny is actually, and then they'll accuse, like they say, that some of the groups in Eastern Ukraine are of neo-Nazi leaning. There was one group. What was the name of it? is that true? There was a group in Eastern Ukraine that had like Nazi sympathies or something like that. I know it's just one small group out of a group of great men that fight for the liberation of Donbass. But I just wanted to know if that was actually true. That's what I heard. There was like, I forgot what the name of the group.
Well, as far as I know there is one unit, it's battalion. It's like a little over than 50 or 60 people. They call Rusich. The small brigade that was fighting. It was active in 2014, 2015. Now this group is virtually gone. They was unformed. So to be fair, yes, it was such group, small group.
So yeah, that's what I thought. It was a very small group. Yeah.
No, you cannot compare it to such group in Ukraine like Azov, which has tens of thousands of people, or right sector, who are open United sympathizers who know wear uniforms with swastika. It's all that stuff. Just uncomparable.
Yes, I understand that. And the magnitude of these groups are not comparable. These are literally thousands of men versus, like you said, under 100 men that was in that one group in eastern Ukraine. When it comes to the right sector, Svoboda, all these different, the Azov battalion, they're openly Nazi. When it comes to the Azov battalion, literally carrying around pictures of Adolf Hitler, wearing swastikas and other Nazi icons. It's despicable. It's disturbing, to say the least. And the United States open support for these groups, and by supporting West Ukraine's government, they're openly supporting that because the West Ukraine are sponsoring these groups to go and kill people in East Ukraine and to put down the liberation efforts that they call terrorist groups. They've labeled the liberation movements in Eastern Ukraine as terrorist groups, but ultimately they're just people that want independence. They want their lives back, and they have I know there's many different groups in the Eastern Ukraine, and it's weird is that I look through like some of these different groups, and it doesn't seem like they have a really coherent ideology. It seems that it's like the different groups. One that supports like more of an old Soviet system. There's like one that's like a more supportive of traditional Russia. There's like an Orthodox Christian group, and then there's like the main group. The main groups that fight. They don't really seem to have like a really an ideology other than liberation from Western Ukraine. That's another thing is that a lot of the enemies towards the a lot of the enemies against the Eastern Ukrainian liberation movement have labeled the movement as being communist or of being extremely pro-Soviet. What do you think about that?
Well, it's definitely not true. You have to remember one thing, but one most important thing. Those people were defending themselves. They didn't come to Kyiv. They didn't come to Western Ukraine to conquer them. They didn't come to those parts of Ukraine with war. All they was doing. They wanted their right to be recognized. They wanted to be recognized as equals. And the Ukrainian regime responded with army. They were defending their homes, and they now defending their homes. So it's absolutely not correct.
Yeah, I wasn't accusing it. I was just saying what other people have said, and I see a lot of like the online trolls. A lot of times have labeled the group as being similar to that they're very pro-Soviet, or trying to say even that they try to label these people like compare them to the Bolsheviks, of course in a derogatory way.
The left idea, of course, very popular because they rise against regime. They rise against pro-regime oligarchs. Of course, left idea is popular there, but to say that they're communists, they want to go to have Soviet times, it wouldn't be correct thing to say like that.
Well, I think that most of Eastern Europe realizes that even the people that are proponents of the pro-Soviet system, they realize that's pretty much that's a thing of the past. Is that a lot of the people that like the Soviet Union don't really believe that it could be reattainable, and it's not really a way to go forward. There are some people, of course, that cling on to the idea of returning to the Soviet Union, bringing back the Soviet Union some of communists in Russia, the Communist Party of the Russian Federation. Of course, they kind of believe it's possible, not to the full restoration, but most of the people of Eastern Europe, the whole list on the different Soviet republics, realized that it's very highly unlikely that it could ever be reinstituted. And in my personal opinion, it's definitely not something they should be looking towards for the future. There was definitely major errors, to say the least, and I think at the beginning there was definitely very rotten smell coming from the center of the who ran the Soviet Union, but when it comes, and also with Stalin and what happened under him. But at the same time, I believe that it's been used, the Soviet boogeyman idea, that Putin's trying to reinstitute the Soviet Union, or that the different freedom fighters across Eastern Europe are just, agents trying to restore the Soviet Union. It's a red herring tactic by the media in order to try to delegitimize these different movements and try to delegitimize the Russian government and the Russian people by trying to keep in the minds of Americans of the Cold War and scaring them of the idea of a reemergence of the Soviet Union. However, ironically, I think that the Russia, the Russian Federation of today, is more powerful than the Soviet Union was towards the end. And ultimately, ultimately they're in better shape than the Soviet Union was from about 1975 on, is that their economy was so stagnant towards the end, and there were so many internal problems that really the powers that the Soviet Union appeared to have had in 1984, when there was really a heighten of the Cold War, the powers that the Soviet Union seemed to have had was kind of a facade. There is no doubt it was a very powerful country, but I think that Russian Federation today, in ways, more powerful because of the stability that it has compared to the instability and the economic problems that the later Soviet Union had. But I think that a lot of the people of they're supportive of the liberation of Lugansk and Donetsk, a lot of them are actually anti-communist. It's ironic, a lot of the people definitely would not like to see a restoration of the Soviet Union. And a lot of the people in Russia, is ultimately a lot of the United Russia deputies and United Russia supporters are pretty strongly opposed to any idea of a restoration of the Soviet Union. When it comes to the future going on in East Ukraine, and do you think that there's ever going to be like a confederation between the two republics? Like they were trying to. I remember they were trying to, under the banner of Novorossiya, that we're going to combine Donetsk and Lugansk. Do you think in the future that they'll ever have a unified country, or is it going to remain like two separate government bodies?
Well, I certainly think so, and I believe so, because that was the original idea, was to have one united Novorossiya, the region that was existing and was existing very successfully. So hopefully in future there will be one government, if they will stay independent, not with Russia, not with Ukraine. Of course, yes, pretty much I do hope for this, and I will tell you more people who live there hope for this as well.
Yes, I think it's the only way forward. I mean, they'll never have any real stability, and there'll never really be a feeling of any type of victory. It's like ultimately the whole point of the war, the whole point of fighting against West Ukraine is so they couldn't divide the people of Novorossiya. But if they let them divide, and ultimately, two countries, two separate entities trying to combat the much more powerful Kiev will not have the same ability as them combined together in a unified Novorossiya, a unified people, not Lugansk and Donetsk, but Lugansk and Donetsk together.
Chris, let me say this. You see, Donbass do not fight against Western Ukraine. They fight against ideology. So to say that Donbass fighting against any part of Ukraine would be incorrect as well. They're fighting against ideology, against Nazi ideology. This was the reason why they was started.
Well, yeah, I understand that. It's not a fight between the peoples of these two countries. It's a fight between the government of Kiev, really, versus the rest of Ukraine. But these people that have been specifically targeted, which is the people of Eastern Ukraine, who have a lot of ethnic Russians and have a different history than a lot of the rest of Ukraine, is that ultimately the Kiev government's unpopular pretty much everywhere. There's a lot of critics to the Kiev government in Ukraine. There's less in Kiev, and there's less in western parts of the country. However, in the eastern, the people of the east, I understand, yes, they're not attacking the people of West Ukraine. It's not a civil war based on regional differences. It's a civil war based on ideological differences and ultimately a murderous regime that's hijacked the capital of Ukraine. And ultimately, that's what is unfortunate, is that I see a lot of, it seems like a hate towards Ukraine as a whole that's been generated by the hijacking of this country by the Poroshenko government and the United States installing the government in 2014. Let's not forget that the United States brought about this government pretty much, is that there'd be no government in Kiev, there would be no Poroshenko there. There'd be no in Kiev if it wasn't for the United States, sponsoring the riots, sponsoring Euromaidan, and they gave them $1 billion as soon as they came to the government. The fingerprints are all over of the United States and Uncle Sam bringing about the current Ukrainian regime. So I totally understand that this is not a war based on regional sectarian differences, or even like in some countries differences over religion. Like I think some people have been tried to accuse that this is ultimately some kind of religion, but it's ultimately they're all Orthodox Christian practically. They're all of the same religion.
Actually, I have to say some people try really hard to start religion war as well. I don't know if you hear it or not, but now there's basically two main churches in Ukraine. One Orthodox churches which have Moscow Patriarchy, and the other Orthodox church but have Kiev Patriarchy. Basically, it's a long story, very, very, very difficult. But the main thing, Kiev Patriarchy, support of Ukrainian government. And now people from Kiev Patriarchy destroying churches and expel people from the churches who are under Moscow Patriarchy. So regime really trying hard to start religion war as well. I don't know why they're doing it, but they really doing it. A few weeks ago, they wanted to ban Moscow Patriarchy at all. No, but only because most of the Ukrainian people pray in these churches, they wasn't there to put it into the vote in parliament. But there was even speeches, and they really tried to do this. And I think after some time they will try to do it again. And this could get really, really nasty, because as we all know, the religious wars is the most brutal, the most bloody ones.
Yeah, that's crazy. I think I saw something about that, but I totally forgot that the Ukrainian patriarch or whatever had pretty much declared a war against the other Orthodox followers in the country, which is weird. Thinking about how talk about sectarian, is that's the Orthodox Church is a sect of the Christian religion, and this is a sect of the Orthodox Church. I know that they have different ones. For example, I live not too far from a large Greek community. So a lot of these people, they're not followers of the Moscow or the Russian Orthodox Church, but they're followers of the Greek Orthodox Church. And then they also do have, we have an area where there's Serbians and stuff like that. I'm not sure where, I know there's an Orthodox Church actually not too far from where I live. But I don't think it's of the Eastern or the Moscow Orthodox Church or whatever that fall under the Patriarch Kirill, who is known to be, I think that he's pretty political. I would say that he's definitely in favor of Putin. I saw another thing is that he's actually supported Hugo Chavez in Venezuela. He's definitely, he didn't even despite the fact that Castro was not even religious and that he was an atheist. He still, I know that he at least met with Fidel Castro, and I think he generally liked him. At least he didn't maybe didn't agree with everything. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of politics when it comes to these churches, and the same way with the Vatican, the ungodly, excuse my pun there, but the ungodly amount of political ness of the Vatican Church and what they've, during the Cold War, how strongly pro-American that they were, and during the World War II, is that the Vatican was covertly pro-Nazi and was helping Nazis escape Europe. The Pope was definitely an ally, I would say, to Adolf Hitler and allies. But that's what's sad, is that religion, how much politics can get mixed into religion, and it ultimately it makes I think is that these religions also, if they look at what they just teach in their books and what they teach in, for example, the Quran and the Bible, it's generally a peaceful message, and it's, loving your neighbor, and, it's just trying to be a decent human being. However, these big, these big religious bodies get politics mixed into it, and, get a lot of human greed and envy mixed into it, and it results in something that is not of the book that they are supposedly preaching about. And I feel that when it comes to Kiev, it's a little bit of that. And I feel like also people can get paid off, and that the church members or whatever, the people the clergy of the church organization might have been paid off in order to take a very strong stance. Because sometimes people won't listen to their media, they won't listen to their government, but ultimately what the church tells them is what they'll believe, because they believe that the church is second to the Word of God, whatever their priest tells them, or whatever.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Yeah, most people wouldn't listen to some media brainwashing, but most of them would definitely listen to what the church saying them. And that's why the regime trying to use it, it's someone trying to ignite a big war just in the heart of Europe. Probably the same as in the Middle East.
So I think, generally, what I've noticed is I think that the Orthodox community as a whole is not too friendly. I'm talking about all the Orthodox churches together. I think they're not too keen. They don't, on the Kiev regime, they don't really, they find what they've done to, shelling Russian Orthodox churches and what they've done to many of their followers just absolutely despicable. Is that ultimately, when it comes to the West, this whole idea, them using religion and acting like that they're the real Orthodox Church it's sad, and at the same time it's almost laughable, because it's sad, because these people are literally destroyed, they vandalized churches throughout eastern Ukraine, and it's similar to it kind of reminds me of when Israel pretends to care about Christians, and at the same time their followers, the extreme Zionists, they vandalize churches across Israel and in Palestine. The Christians are targeted by the Israeli regime. Is that ultimately, if you can mix whatever political agenda you have, you mix it with said religion, it's really one of the most powerful tools is by false doctrine, false religion. Has been a major problem in the last century or so, is that we see with Wahhabism when it comes to Islam, or when it comes to the Catholic Church and what they've been able to influence Westerners to believe, and also other churches, Protestant churches, that have been infected with Zionist propaganda, like the Southern Baptist Church, where you had their leader telling you that if you didn't support the Israeli regime, then you're going to hell. This is insanity, but this is what was said by Chuck Hagee. He's still around. He's on television quite a bit, actually. Going back to Ukraine, however, and when it comes to what we can do to help here in the West, and besides giving out, talk about your charity or in your organization, Humanitarian Battalion of Ireland, UK, what do you suggest people that are listening to the show can do to help out when it comes to spreading information, or what do you advise for them if they want to take a part in helping out the people and the victims affected by the war?
Well, what I would ask them to do, to go to the local congressman, trying to influence him to go into Congress and try to push Ukrainian regime to implement Minsk agreement, just as they're supposed to do. If Ukrainian regime would press for at least half as much as Russia would press, although Russia is not a part of Minsk agreement, it's not a side of conflict. Ukraine would have no choice but to implement at least this agreement, at least partially, at least to withdraw the military hardware. That would be a big help, because most of the victims, most of the suffering now is from the big caliber guns, from the shelling, from the far away. If they would go to the congressmen and ask them to pressure Ukrainian government, that would be huge help, not only to the Donbass people, but to generate the peace in the world.
And explain to my listeners exactly what are the main details of the Minsk II agreement or whatever.
The main point of Minsk is withdrawal of military hardware from the connection line, from the front line. Then political part, when Ukrainian regimes have to adopt a law which is recognize the same right of the East Ukraine as the same. The right to free use of Russian language, not only in homes, but in TV channels, in books. Then it has to be on the political level. It has to be put into the constitution reform. That would allow the certain level of freedom, especially the financial freedom of region. Not only for the east of Ukraine, but for the rest of Ukraine. It would be good for the whole of the country. To have free election in the Donbass region, which people of Donbass would be allowed to elect their own leaders. And the very last point of this agreement, handing over the border to the Ukrainian authorities, but it should be done only after all other parts will be implemented. But once again, the main part is withdrawal of the troops and complete stop of fire, of shelling.
And what do you think? Ultimately, I think that one of the main things that should be demanded is definitely needs to be some kind of financial restitution. They need to, because I know that the damage must be, it's just the amount of damage that must have been racked up must be horrendous. How much it's going to cost to rebuild some of these affected places most affected by the war, and how much it's costed, the financially and also on the tolls of, and you can never, put a number on what these people's lives are worth and what happened, all these people that were, killed by the war. That's the unfortunate reality is, though, that ultimately most of our government, most of our congressmen are ultimately on board 100% when it comes to the foreign policy of the United States, and they believe, all the time I hear congressmen or senators saying of the Russian threat, calling Vladimir Putin even a killer, like John McCain has, even though he's a senator. But the same point is our Congress is, seems to be unilaterally 100% opposed to any kind of pro-Russian stances, any kind of pro-Russian agreements, and 100% opposed to Moscow. It seems very few of them have criticized the United States' hardline stance against Russia and this new Cold War that seems to be starting between Russia and the United States. Only a few countries, or a few congressmen, a few senators ever spoke out really anything about any kind of foreign policy. It's like Tulsi Gabbard is one of the few that criticized about the Syrian policy, but I think that a lot of what, when it comes to West Ukraine and bringing it to the spotlight and essentially bringing change about, it's going to be from public awareness. It's kind of like what happened with apartheid in South Africa. That for many years the United States government was in support of it until it started to become politically inconvenient. Then at least they, no longer were publicly in support of it, and they changed their stance. And it was because of how it became very unpopular in the public view, and people. There was actually a mass awareness that started happening with that. The United States government actually labeled Nelson Mandela as a terrorist until 2008, which is it's a funny fact because that's how the United States government will act. Is that with that situation is that they'll be in support of said group that they now don't like, but when it becomes politically inconvenient for them to be in support of that group anymore, they'll change it and they'll say that they're in support of this new group or whatever. Like what they said, like, oh yeah, we always liked Mandela, even though that they labeled him as a terrorist. And I think that Cameron and David Cameron, also another person, said he liked Mandela. I believe that he was part of part of plans or whatever to kill him in the 1980s. The British government, British intelligence were planning to potentially kill Mandela. And Reagan here, he had labeled him as a terrorist, while at the same time working with Bin Laden in Afghanistan, who he labeled as he labeled his group of fighters, the Mujahideen, as freedom fighters and many other good adjectives.
Well, what United States people has to understand, that those people who are now in charge in Ukraine, they have big potential to become like Mujahideen in Afghanistan for United States. Now, when the Mujahideen turns from freedom fighters to terrorists, the people who in charge in Ukraine now has exactly the same potential, or even more dangerous, because they are much closer, they have much more sophisticated weapons, and much more money, of course.
Well, ultimately, yeah, the Mujahideen turned into the Taliban, and then ultimately we end up, I'll say quote-unquote fighting a war with them. Ultimately, what's funny is that they try to act like with ideological difference, or that they didn't like the Taliban government because they were repressive of different groups inside the country. But ultimately, the real reason that they fought the Taliban in 2001, I think it really had to do with the fact that Muhammad Omar banned the cultivation of opium, and then he ultimately 99% of Afghanistan's opium also was gone. That's what really, in my opinion, was the reason why the United States went in there. But when it comes to the Ukrainian government,
it's actually funny, because as far as I'm not really into Afghanistan politics, but as far as I heard, the world said to the Taliban government, we will recognize you if you will tackle the opium production. They did it. They tackled opium production. They slashed it by many times, and exactly at the same time they got the war in their territory for the opium.
Well, yeah, it's ironic, that the opium was cut, and then like a year later, as this also Afghanistan was all of a sudden responsible for 9/11, or was partially responsible, and now we had to go attack them. And Muhammad Omar, of course, that he was ultimately a shithead, and he was a person supported that was from an ideological repugnant group that killed a lot of people in the 80s and killed a lot of Russians in the 80s. So there's no way in support of him. But what he did do was tackle opium production, and the CIA, or as should be known, the Cocaine Importation Agency / other drugs importation agency, wouldn't stand for the opium. 3/4 of the world opium supply was gone, and I also think that the big pharmaceutical companies had a part of it. It was for every reason besides terrorism, practically. It's why the war in Afghanistan began. And I think you have kind of a point when it comes to Kiev, is that they could become like a Mujahideen type scenario, but that goes along the lines of believing that terrorism.
Yeah, and from today they get visa-free travel to the Europe. So imagine what could happen. Ukraine has visa-free travel from today.
What will happen, and what is that? I don't think that the group as a whole, I don't think would ever, really it's like what happened with Mujahideen is that they turned into the Taliban. But I think that the CIA has always been pretty much behind, or the Mossad and other Western intelligence groups have been pretty much behind the Islamic terrorism, the main groups. However, I think there's been splinter-offs and people that went rogue, and they've done terror attacks in the West. And now that's one of the things that they can't control, and now that they regret. And I think the same thing could happen with Kiev, is that these groups have splintered off. There's further right nationalist groups and such, and other rogues coming out of Kiev that were spawned off of the Poroshenko government and them supporting of this right-wing terrorism, that they could become problems in other European countries. People like the Azov battalion, maybe one day people might go rogue from it, or the group itself might go rogue. That's the thing that they can't predict with the intelligence community, is that they don't know who's truly going to stay loyal to the United States and the CIA, or who's going to go rogue. And that's why it's one of the big criticisms you can make about the United States foreign policy as well, is that they're conniving in heinous enough to support these absolutely repugnant groups, but at the same time, they're too incompetent to keep these groups together, and ultimately to keep an eye on everybody that comes into these groups, and later they end up doing attacks like what we've seen in the last few months in Europe, and ultimately they lose track of people, many things happen. It's crazy that that right now, after so many terror attacks that have happened in EU countries recently, that they still consider Russia to be their main enemy, when Russia's trying to fight terrorism so the terrorism in those countries would stop. And you see the two countries where these terrorists seem to be coming from, Libya and Syria. These are two countries that are directed effectively by the United States Israeli regime change motives. And Gaddafi, when he fell, all these terrorist groups that had been kept in line before now had a country to roam freely in. And Syria, if Assad was to go, the same thing would happen, but it's already starting, because now that he doesn't have the same grip over his country, all these terrorist groups that the United States are funding, these different mercenaries that have been imported in, they also end up going to Europe every now and then and doing a terror attack. I wonder, it's like, do you think that's going to change? Do you think the people of the European Union are finally going to get tired of having these terror attacks and finally realize that Russia is not the main enemy here, and that ultimately it's these it's radical terrorist groups coming from the Middle East, and it's the United States for making the regime change policies for allowing these terrorist groups to flourish? Do you think that the public opinion of Europe is going to change? Because they seem to be a little bit more informed than America, and they seem to be a little bit more critical thinking. I feel like there's more possibility that they'll finally come to their senses, unlike America, where they've been an illusion for so long, is that Americans still believe their country's number one. Their government really, their country can't do no wrong. They believe their government can do no wrong, but they believe their country itself can't do any wrong. And do you think that Europe's conscious system will change?
Well, I think the majority of people in Europe already get tired of this. More than that, I'm sure that majority of people understand what's going on. And you can see it by election, even in France. The first, as you said previously, Marine Le Pen was a big surprise, although he came second. But Macron, if you read his program, one of the points of the program was to normalize relationship with Russia. So people in Europe do understand what's going on and who really the enemy and who's their friend. That's the elite who dependent on dollars, on money, and the elite made politics,
Well, yeah, it was interesting that Macron, one of his first things he did, however, was he met with Vladimir 2 days after he got sworn in, and he was like trying to take like a tough stance against Vladimir Putin, which is just laughable. That that this guy's going to act like he's going to go toe to toe with Vladimir. The people of France, definitely.
He only came into office and he was supposed to show his people that he's strong, so it's all understandable.
Well, and I think the only reason that Macron won, honestly, was the media and how bad they attacked them, and they attacked Le Pen, and at the same time they painted Macron to be like this outsider that everybody wanted to root for Macron, and ultimately he's one of the as establishment as it gets when it comes to his policies. And really, what I could say about Macron is that he's like a French Obama or a French Hillary Clinton versus Le Pen. A lot of people compare Le Pen to Trump, but I think Le Pen was different to Trump, and that's why she lost. I think that if Le Pen was like Trump, they would have let her win. But ultimately, since she was absolutely, truly anti-establishment, I think, in my opinion, I think she lost because of that. And they made sure she lost. The media didn't give her nearly the airtime that they gave Trump over here. That people really said in the same breath that Trump was anti-establishment, but at the same time, you see how much the media gave attention to Trump. Really, Trump got 100 times more airtime than Ron Paul did in the 2012 election. And even though I don't really like Bernie Sanders, that Bernie Sanders got pretty much blacked out during the election, while Trump was talked about constantly by the media, whether it was bad or good. It's like what they say is that bad publicity is better than or bad publicity is better than no publicity, and that's what I felt was going on with the when it came with Trump, is that they gave him so much bad publicity that people started to like him. That it made the media realize that they're not liked, so that they supported Trump in order to bring about the support for this new era of politics. But it's funny that right now he has like 21% approval rating. So I don't know if that if Trump's really in the way that the United States establishment wants to go. I almost feel like they might impeach him and put somebody else in, because right now they've talked. The media has pretty much painted out to be that way, that they're near being impeached, and there's been all this talk about the Russia Trump connection or whatever. I think that in some ways that made Trump is just too much of a loose cannon for the establishment, and they fear him. They fear that he could split away from them, and perhaps or he may not split away totally, but split away in small moves here and there. And at the same time, I feel like when it comes to what's going on in the Middle East right now with the whole Qatar situation, is that you see his stance. He has a different stance than Tillerson. Is that there's definitely like the deep state itself is having a hard time keeping him anchored. I feel what's going on in Europe right now with the potential that the United Kingdom might be, they might be taking a very different stance in foreign policy than the rest of Europe, and with Corbyn coming about. By the way, I have to ask, what is your opinion on Jeremy?
On Corbyn, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. To be honest, he came nearly out of nowhere. He was, of course, known, but it was, I don't know. It's like with Trump. Hope are huge, but you have to see what his real actions would be and what the establishment would allow him to do. It's really very hard to say. It's too early to say anything certain.
Well, for me, the big red flag with Corbyn is the fact that he seems to want to stay in the European Union. He actually was a major supporter of the staying in the European Union when they had the Brexit vote a year ago, and now it's been now a lot of talk is that actually they won't be leaving the European Union because Jeremy Corbyn's not going to allow it. Even though that May is still technically the Prime Minister, Corbyn now his influence in the UK has just went up by a huge amount. It's like one of the things like we'd have to see him. We have to see him in power to see what would happen. I know that Corbyn's taken Corbyn, when it comes to Israel, I don't think he's really the biggest friend of Israel. I think he stood by the Palestinians at times, at least. And when it comes to Latin American left, he also, like, for example, I know that he at least met with Chavez at one point. So he definitely has more. There's definitely a lot better signs than Trump. Trump always had been supportive of Israel and had been actually one of the most pro-Israel politicians, or pro-Israel businessmen that I can think of. However, when it comes to, we've seen this before. We've seen a politician act like they're anti-establishment, that they're going to change things dramatically, and when they get the power, it's more the same. I feel like Corbyn would be more the same once he gets there. Sanders, remember, is that he has all these different, he had a lot of strong stances about Hillary and saying that the politics were, dominated by Wall Street, and then all of a sudden he supported Hillary, just like a few weeks after he had said all these things about Hillary.
It was a huge disappointment, not only for the United States, but for the whole world.
Yeah, the whole world, when, I think the whole world, had a little bit of, was a little bit annoyed when Bernie pretty much had a sellout moment, and because people were thinking that Bernie Sanders would become the president in 2016, and Bernie would change. That this would be the massive move forward. Is that May Obama wasn't the person to change America's foreign policy? Because that's what the world's worried about, is America's foreign policy, and it kind of disturbs me how little it seems like some American voters seem to care about the foreign policy part. To me, it's the most important part, because this is the thing that has killed literally millions of people worldwide, and it's the reason why America is, not liked around the world. It's because America's military has killed innocent people for oil and banking interests, but really any reason besides freedom. So the whole idea that the foreign policy could possibly change, and I think that's the thing, is that it's never going to change as long as the current government's around. It's going to take a total reboot of the system. It's going to take a total fall of our government in order for any kind of real change to happen. Whether it's Trump, whether it's maybe in the future Tulsi Gabbard or whatever, whatever's the next president. I think that my honest pick is I think it's going to be Marco Rubio. Is going to be next. Rubio is going to be next, and probably we could also see in the future. Unfortunately, I would say Elizabeth Warren's going to be a candidate potentially. Actually, I don't think so. I think it's going to be Ted Cruz will be back though. All these god awful politicians, however, that have been recycled through, and it doesn't look like it's going to get any better. That's America's way. Is that ultimately that the man will change, but the truck keeps going the same direction. And I feel like even there might have been, like, for example, I think with Jimmy Carter, what he did as president with America's foreign policy and supporting the Mujahideen was absolutely despicable. But however, he became a pretty big proponent for Palestine and talked pretty angrily against Israel in later years. Now, I still think that Jimmy Carter is probably still one of them. However, it might go to say that maybe when you're a president, you really can't say anything. But once you leave the presidency, sometimes they don't actually really believe in what they did. They don't really, because they were forced to. Like Jimmy Carter, I think, might have been forced to do some of the things that he did at the threat of whatever, his family, blackmail, that kind of thing. A lot of people say Trump's being blackmailed. There's different things that people believe if Trump might have done. There's talk of, remember, one of the things that is kind of not talked about by anybody is that Trump had connections with Jeffrey Epstein. If you're not aware who Jeffrey Epstein is, look up Jeffrey Epstein, Dershowitz scandal. That was actually one that didn't actually result in anything, really. But Jeffrey Epstein was convicted, I think, back in 2006. He didn't get any real punishment because he was a billionaire of being a pedophile. And I know that Trump, I believe, at one point was friends with him. So that might be some of the blackmail they have on him. And I think that's part of the MO of the intelligence community, is that they get stuff like that, or they get, whatever else, is that they blackmail you, that you're cheating on your wife. I feel like that's pretty minute in comparison to some of the stuff they can get on people nowadays. And, they have pictures of you and, doing whatever act, it's like, for example, that some people think that, like politicians or whatever, they like bring you in a hotel or whatever, and they have a prostitute come in and they take a picture of you with the prostitute and say, oh yeah, we'll give this to all your friends and family if you don't do exactly what we'll say. And that's kind of how it works. I don't think, though, some people are trying to insinuate that Russia is blackmailing Trump with that, and that Trump spent the night with Russian prostitutes, which Vladimir Putin joked off that he doesn't have any blackmail.
Well, it was bizarre story, especially the way they put it. They make it, even if there was some smoke there, but the way they put it, like Trump hired prostitute to urine on the bed where Obama was sleeping some time ago. That's anecdote, honestly. It's laughable.
Yeah, it seemed like a satire story. It seemed like something from The Onion, but it was actually being peddled at one point as like real news. Is that they're trying to say that Trump hired some Russian prostitutes to urinate on the bed that Obama stayed at or whatever. And in my opinion, and I know this is going to sound, as much as I hate Donald Trump, is that Donald Trump is Donald Trump. He has so many women that are probably following him and probably on his phone ready to at one call that he doesn't need to hire prostitutes. Donald Trump doesn't.
Exactly. He's the owner of Miss Universe. Why would he hire prostitutes? That shows the level of the news of mass media today in the world.
I was like, if it was like if it was like John McCain having to hire prostitutes, that wouldn't surprise me because I don't think that he probably has a little bit of a heart of luck of trying to find women that will sleep with him nowadays, especially with that big giant mole on his face. But when people with Donald Trump or whatever, or I think most world leaders, it's like the same thing as that they, is one of the accusations that they try to throw out at different, it's like they try to throw that every now and then, like a world leader that they, that, like, for example, Bolivia's president, they tried to throw out that, Evo Morales is sleeping around. He had a mistress back in 2006. I'm pretty sure every world leader's probably got a few girlfriends, stuff like that. I mean, I'm not saying that every world leader doesn't have integrity, but I'm saying that these are often type A personalities that, they have literally thousands of women chasing them. I'm sure that a lot of world leaders are not exactly cleaning that department, and
we're all humans at the end, isn't it?
I mean, in my opinion, there's a lot worse things they can be doing than having put your dipstick somewhere where you shouldn't have. I mean, come on, it's like the literally put that is like at the same. It would be like the same newspaper. It's like big scandal about Evo Morales having a mistress. Then on another page, it'll be like Barack Obama orders drone strike to kill 171 innocent civilians in Raqqa or something like that. And then then the same newspaper will be trying to talk about how Evo Morales is a terrible dictator for Bolivia, while Barack Obama is a wonderful scholar that won the Nobel Peace Prize and all that. I mean, it's like, give me a fucking break, And same thing with many different politicians that I see that these people that have been implicated in very horrible things. Is that the fact that what Israel's government's been implicated in. They have these people are funding terrorists. Our own government's funding terrorists, and they'll try to put down other leaders like Putin or whatever for minute stuff. They'll try to put down Putin. The big scandal about him, they try to make up stuff too. Sometimes it's like if you look at like Vladimir Putin on Google, there's a lot of people because of the media and stuff like that. There's a lot of people that believe either Vladimir Putin's racist, they believe Vladimir Putin is homophobic, which that people forget that in Russia, homosexuality is legal in the country, unlike 70 countries around the world, and Saudi Arabia being one of them, and many American allies on that list. Like there's African dictators where one of the African dictators I know is supported by the United States. I believe he's of Gambia, and he says that any homosexual in this country will get their throat slit. So that says a lot. And another one.
Shouldn't go too far. Look at Saudi Arabia, where gays just literally executed.
Yeah, it's literally countries where they execute simply for being gay, no other offense, are supported by the United States government. And you have countries but they'll criticize Russia for making a bill that is really to protect minors. That's really what it's about. And it's also that curb violence in the country between, the far right and a lot of these gay protesters. There was clashes that were going on. There was a lot of problems. So it's not really anything about homophobia. And when it comes to homophobia as well, let's not forget what this past this country has with gays. Let's not forget what past this country has with racism. I see that also being alleged by, they've alleged like Russia being racist or whatever. When let's not forget Jim Crow. Let's not forget that this country still has a major problem with racism to today. It's like it's like they trying to act with this holier than thou mentality. That it's like, well, we don't have that problem in our country. Is that you guys just had lynch mobs and stuff like that 70, 80 years ago here in the United States. We have no really way to be preaching about that. Another thing is that the religious intolerance that they try to say when it comes to Iran is what comes to mind. That they try to say that they are religiously intolerant. When Saudi Arabia, you can't attend church on Sunday in Saudi Arabia, but you can attend church in Iran because they allow Christians, they allow Jewish people to practice their religion. Saudi Arabia does not. The total hypocrisy when it comes to the United States and who they support is ridiculous. And I think people are finally starting to see through this bullshit. I see a lot of it online, people pointing that out. But I wonder what's going to take finally people for it to end, when people are finally going to be say enough is enough, actually do something about it. That's where the problem is. A lot of Americans will shit talk, but they won't do anything to walk the walk. They'll talk the talk, but they won't walk the walk. That's the problem. We need more action. We need more marches. We need, like you said, even people writing their congressmen about Minsk II agreement would be a massive step forward compared to what a lot of Americans, the inaction that they've been in with now. I wonder, in Ireland where you live, is there any more, awareness of the issues over there in Ukraine than there is here in the United States, or do people just blindly follow whatever, propaganda channel? I'm guessing BBC is the main one there. How's the situation of the awareness there about what's going on?
Well, you have to remember that Ireland is a very small country, and Ireland is a neutral country. It's not part of NATO or part of anything. So people are pretty much turned inside themselves. So the main news channel doesn't talk much about that, and people pretty much have no idea what's going on there. When we held demonstration on the 2nd of May, there was 3 years since Odessa massacre. People was passing by, was looking at the photos. We put photos of what happened in the union buildings, and people was still, after 3 years, people was very surprised and very horrified of what's happened. They haven't got a clue what happened there. So there you go. No, not much awareness at all here, unfortunately.
So yeah, now I mean, when it comes to Ireland, like you said, they're neutral, so it's kind of interesting there. What's the main news channel there that they watch? Do they watch BBC, or do they have their own there in Ireland?
Of course, they watch BBC and they have their own channels, but as I said, BBC, for the last year or so, BBC are not very much on Ukrainian conflict as the other channels, as well.
BBC, there's a couple of different abbreviations that exist in America for BBC. I mean, there's British Broadcasting Corporation, of course, or as I call them, the British Bullshit Corporation.
That's what it is. Yeah, that's what it is. British Bullshit Corporation.
There's another abbreviation as well that exists, but that's a little bit too X-rated for the show. We'll just ignore that. Look, here in America, CNN, Fox, MSNBC, it's that's the main three, of course, and it's weird how partisan divided. That's how they do it here. They have like the three channels, and if you watch Fox, you're going to be a hardline. Generally, you'll be a hardline conservative. You're going to be right now thinking that the Antifa guys and stuff like that are responsible for what's a lot of the problems in this country. You're going to be believing that Trump is totally 100%. Is trying to fix our country. Then you have MSNBC. They're trying to make it seem like Trump is the new Adolf Hitler and that Trump is ready to start his massacre of gays or something like that. Then you got CNN that is pretty much it still pushes the same mainstream narrative, and they try to say, oh yeah, the Putin is sponsoring Donald Trump, and there's all this. It's funny, after the Comey hearings, it's still going on. Is that the idea that Trump's definitely worked with Russia. They're definitely taking money from Russia, which, when it comes to politicians, is that I don't think that any of our United States government politicians are actually secretly working with Russia, but there's definitely been deals made with Russia. For example, there was the uranium deal that Hillary Clinton did, and she pocketed a pretty penny, I think, off of that. There was also No,
I don't understand. What is wrong with this cooperation with Russia? So when Hillary Clinton takes money from Saudi Arabian fund, it's okay. But when there's rumors that Trump might work with Russia, might not, there's huge scene out of it, huge drama.
Yeah, there was a funny skit that was done on Facebook. There's this guy. He lives in America. He's a Russian immigrant in America, and he's like crazy Russian dad's in the name of his Facebook page. And he was like joking about how with Donald Trump, what's all this hysteria about talking to Russia? It's like what, you can't talk to Russia? It's like what's next? We'll tell our kids that you can't play with other kids because they're Russian. It was a pretty funny skit, and he does like different like rants and stuff like that. But that was for me. It's funny also the hate that he got about that. is like people are like, oh no, it's obvious that Donald Trump was working with the Russians, and some people even go as far to say that if like I've seen this comment before made, is that there was somebody saying that, oh yeah, we used to nuke countries for stuff like what Russia did in the election, but we're not going to do that because we're better nowadays or something like that. I'm like, are you really saying that they deserve that they potentially deserve to be atomically bombed over a supposed hacking of the election or whatever they're even calling it now? Sometimes they call it a hacking of the election, and other times they call it a meddling with the election. They have not made it really clear how they interfered. Some people say, oh, well, they spread fake news on the internet in order to make people disillusioned with our system, so they voted for Donald Trump, or that they wouldn't vote for Hillary. There's so many different, I don't want to even call it an explanation, because it's not really an explanation, but different, it's really a conspiracy theory. That's what it is, a conspiracy theory that has no merit of this idea of the Russian connection with Donald Trump. I wonder when's it going to stop. I feel like it's going to continue, and it's a way of keeping Russia in the spotlight as a country to be feared. Sergei, I think I've asked you before, but it eludes me right now at the moment. Where were you originally born?
I was originally born in Ukraine, in central Ukraine, in a beautiful city called Vinnytsia. That's actually where Poroshenko from. He was born there as well, and he started his career from there. First he sold fuel confectionaries, then he grew bigger and bigger, and now he's the head of the regime.
Okay, interesting. You're like what? I mean, do you remember at all the Soviet days? I mean, I think that you might remember a little bit, but I don't do that.
Well, I do remember a little bit. I was born in 1977, so I was 14 years old when Soviet Union collapsed. But I still remember it was my child years. Of course, it was happy years, and of course, so my remembrance of the time is a good one, is a warm one.
Yeah, so it's like, you remember it, but you don't, because, it's like, I would, usually, what I would think is like, if, it made people like born before 1970 and stuff like that could really remember it, because by the time you were already, by the time you were 10, it was already 87, Glasnost, Peter Stryker had already been instituted, it was already changing significantly. Usually,
everything was pretty much starting to collapse all around me, so,
Yeah, it's like,
But still,
really,
I was a child at that time, so I couldn't say that my recalls of the time are somehow no good or bad or great. What you can remember when you're 10 years old and when you live happily with your mother, when your mother is the teacher and he's the teacher in your school where you're studying as well. Was pretty happy time.
I gotta admit, Sergio, I actually didn't. I was not even sure. You tell me that have you turned 40 yet? Is your birthday coming up, or is it behind?
Say again?
When's your birthday? Have you turned 40 this year yet, or?
Yeah, this year on the 21st of December, I will be 40. Couldn't believe it myself.
Yeah. I mean, I have to admit, it's like I actually didn't think you were 40. I thought you might have been I thought you were probably 32, 33. I don't know. I guess maybe it's those East European genes are good. So I feel like Vladimir Putin, he's like 60-something years old, and he's in better shape than a lot of American men at 35. I mean, it's like,
Thanks very much for saying that.
It's like Vladimir Putin. It's one. Even if. Well, he knows judo. I was going to say, I wouldn't want to fight him, but it's like, I don't think anybody would want to fight him. Like, he's a black belt in judo. It was funny. Oliver Stone was asking him a question on his interview, and his response, that's what I like about Vladimir Putin is how, frank he is with his responses, is that he doesn't really play bullshit. And Oliver Stone, I don't know why he really asked him this, but I think it was just kind of to see what kind of funny answer you give. He said, it's like, okay, it's like what would have happened if you were in a submarine or whatever? You had to take a shower with a gay man, and then Vladimir Putin said, "Well, I know judo," so he pretty much was saying, "I'm not afraid because I know judo." So
it was actually a good answer.
That's what Putin always knows the perfect answer to give. I remember when they're interviewing him by Comey or whatever, he saying it's like, "Oh yeah, did you have anything to do with the firing of our FBI director in the United States?" which of course it was an absurd question itself. But he said, like, oh, you asked a silly question. Let me go play hockey. I was like, I gotta go play hockey around fans. Maybe you should watch. That was the other thing. He's like, I have to go to do his like annual hockey event or whatever. Yeah, honestly, when I see like our American politicians and how much of wimps they are, and I see like Vladimir Putin, that of course I like his policies and stuff like that. But another reason I like him is just the character that he has. He's actually a man that leads his country, a man that actually has balls to do anything. You know, our politicians are such wimps. Even Donald Trump that acts like he's got this giant ego or whatever. Is that when he's confronted by the establishment, he's folded. All that stuff that he said about Syria, all this tough talk that he said he was going to do about Saudi Arabia, he literally told on a press conference that he pretty much insinuated that Saudi Arabia was behind 9/11. And now one of his first foreign meeting was to Saudi Arabia. And he literally goes over there and dances with the Saudi billionaires, the same people that he said were behind 9/11, the same people that he told that he was going to pay their own way. He's now, pretty much reassuring them how he's going to stand behind them. And Trump's old tough talk about how he's going to, stand up to Turkey, stand up to Saudi Arabia. This is some of the things that garnered, I think, a lot of hope in Syria and Russia and countries that have been very disturbed by the foreign policy of America in recent years when they saw that Donald Trump was kind of taking a different stance when it came to these couple countries. It was welcoming, but we've seen that in the first few months, it's totally different. He took a 180. It's a different Donald Trump. It ain't the same one that was on the campaign trail. It's probably the one after they show him the video of the JFK assassination. They show him some weird angle or whatever where they show the actual shooter. And it's like, any questions? Nope. All right. And at that point, you know exactly what you have to do, or else you end up like another JFK, or they, poison your coffee or something like that, or poison your taco bowl, as Donald Trump loves. It's a shit show over here. It's the entire politics of the United States right now. It's a shit show. But I do have some hope in the people right now. There seems to be more consciousness of what's going on. I see a lot more consciousness going towards Palestine. They didn't used to be that. They used to be very hardline that pro-Israel, and now a lot more people are starting to question America's support for Israel. And I think that the same thing that will happen maybe with Ukraine is that it will come into the public attention, similar to apartheid South Africa, is that people will start to criticize Kiev, similar to the criticize the governments of the 80s in South Africa, and then eventually become politically inconvenient for people to back them, for America's government to back Kiev. It's kind of like, that's what it takes usually. Is that it's not the consciousness or the morals of the government that ever make any real changes happen, but when the people demand it, and when they feel like their power is threatened, then they give the concessions, whatever it is, whatever little foreign policy maneuver, in order to try to alleviate the situation. What else was I going to ask? We got 20 minutes, by the way, on the show. Everyone that's listening in. Thanks, everyone who's tuned in tonight. This is UCY TV, and for people that have just tuned in, this is Chris J interviewing here, Sergei Balashov, who came on the show again after about 3 months ago. We interviewed him in February, I believe. I interviewed you, and pretty good interview so far. And by the way, thanks for staying with us. I know it's got to be kind of late over there, but the last time kept you real late. So thanks again for staying on the air with me.
It's always pleasure to talk to you. I apologize to you and to listeners if I'm being not too chatty as I should be, but it's honestly nearly 2 o'clock at night. The previous day was really weird, and I'm a bit tired, so I'm really apologizing for the few understanding.
Yeah. Do you think? Also, I got one question about the Ukraine. Do you think that the leadership exists in order to make a solid Ukraine? Do you think that there's a man, or do you think that there's people that have what it takes in order to have a solid Novorossiya in the future, in order to actually make this come together. Because that's what a lot of times is the issue in countries that are liberation movements, is that often there's splintering inside of their own leadership, and we've seen this before in like African liberation movements, and we've seen this happen kind of what happened in Grenada when President Bishop was assassinated by hardliners of his own party. That do you think that the stability could exist in the leadership? Do you think that there's a man, if you do know potentially a man that could be you think could be the next leader? Maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
To be honest, as much as I want it to be, I don't really have anyone in mind who could be as good as they now at war, when the wartime, and they could be as good when war would be over and the peace would come, because different people good for different times. And the figures, for example, caliber of Castro, who was big revolutionary and who was great leader for his country at the time after the war. I don't see such people now, not in Donetsk People's Republic, not in Lugansk People's Republic. But it doesn't mean that after this war would stop, such people could not arise from the crowd. But at this very moment, I don't anyone who could be even close to this. Unfortunate, it's very unfortunate, but it is close.
Yeah, that's one of the things, is that it's hard to with the ever-changing situation, it's hard to predict what kind of a leader would be needed after the war comes to an end, when the violence comes to an end, for stability of the country. Another question is, do you think that the recent assassinations, talk about the last year or so, with Gibby and Motorola being assassinated, do you think that damaged the morale of the people of Ukraine or people of Novorossiya, or do you think that it improved morale and it actually emboldened and made people strive more for the liberation?
Well, it's a little bit of both. If you're talking about people who are fighting, actually, who are in the front line, their morale gets even higher, because they understand that most of them knew these people personally. Most of them knew what these people were doing, and the military of the republic, of course, their morale get higher. For the civilians, this of course was a huge blow. Of course, those people was really popular. They had charisma, have to be honest, and assassination of such people could not go without the trace, So of course, that's a little bit of both.
Yeah, I understand that. When I found out about Gibby being killed, that was sad to see, and I really hope that no more commanders are killed in this war. I hope that I hope the bloodshed comes to an end, and I really hope that that ultimate lessons are learned from this in the end, when this war comes to an end, is that the people of Ukraine will never fall into the regime change policies of the United States again, is that people will not side with snakes like the people that orchestrated Euromaidan. That the color revolution idea, spawned off of Soros, about it's something that's been tried, ever since the Cold War ended. It's been something that's been repeated a few times, and there was that attempt in Georgia. I think that's how Trotsky was brought about, was we had color revolution.
Well, Ukraine itself fought for this revolution second time. If you remember, first color revolution in Ukraine was in 2014, which has ended in a huge disappointment. But at least that time it was bloodless. Nobody died, nobody got hurt. But this time it's much more brutal, much more violent. People died, a lot of blood, war. So I don't know. I don't even want to think for the future, because if something like that happens for the third time, no country as such as Ukraine could just cease to exist at all. It could just follow the steps of Yugoslavia. That would be unfortunate, because all in all, Ukraine was a good country. Generally, the people are good. They had huge potential. If not for these revolutions.
Well, that's one of the most Europe was the Yugoslavia war that happened in 1999. It's like I said, that'd be the worst case scenario. The NATO intervening, how many people died in Yugoslavia, the absolute horror that happened, and it's like that's why it makes me cringe when people say that Bill Clinton did not have a war, because Bill Clinton was the president when it happened in the NATO attack. NATO killed many people in Yugoslavia, and it's weird how a war in Europe, as much as they, when it comes to other things that happen in Europe, how much they put on the news about this, is that when it comes to Europe, if there's a terror attack, 5 people are killed, it's on the news for an entire day. But a war that killed how many people in Yugoslavia barely even seem to, be remembered in history. 17, 18 years later now, is that a lot of Americans forgot that war even happened. Also is that they try to blame it on the history books, try to blame it on Slobodan, which ultimately,
and he was cleared of all charges in European Court in War Tribunal.
Well, Slobodan, but he died in jail before he would be able to have been freed. It was in 2006. He died in the Hague. So Slobodan obviously was not the one that was responsible. He might have had some culpability for sure, but ultimately the people that were responsible were the United States and foreign forces trying to pull apart Yugoslavia. They sponsored the growing nationalism in the country in order to break apart Yugoslavia after the death of Joseph Tito. And then it came to a head in 1999 with the war. Ultimately, Tito was able to ward off foreign influence and ward off, sectarian differences in the country. And that's what was one of Tito's major strengths, and that's why the country stayed together for so long, was of Mr. Tito. But however, when Tito died, the country fell towards sectarian differences and many other, and fell towards regime change agenda from the United States, from other vultures. And nowadays it's a lot of the former Yugoslavian countries. There's a lot of people that are longing for the reunification of the country, for the times of Tito, and I think it's similar to what is in a lot of there's a lot of people in the Eastern Europe that long for the return of the Soviet Union, but I feel like it's even more. I feel like it's really a much bigger feeling in the ex-Yugoslavian countries, in Serbia, Bosnia, Croatia, and then ultimately you see how they continue to try to Balkanize the Balkans. Is that they continue splintering up. It's like after Yugoslavia fell apart, when it ceased to exist as a country together in 2003, then they split up from Serbia, Montenegro, are now no longer together. And then Kosovo, they sponsored the creation of Kosovo. And it's funny how the United States was so willing to support Kosovo separating from Serbia in 2008, but when Crimea came about, it was a totally different narrative. And in Kosovo, people were literally waving American flags, just like in eastern Ukraine, with people waving Russian flags at the protests. Difference between Kosovo,
you have to remember that in Crimea it was referendum. You can say it was fair, it was unfair, but people did vote, and whatever what somebody thinks, majority did vote for the rejoining with Russia. In Kosovo, there was no any referendum, was no any popular vote. There was only declaration of independence, which was at the very same moment recognized by United States and a few other countries in Europe.
And another thing about Kosovo is that it's a country with no real culture, a country with no real history. It's a made-up country. It's a total figment, practically, of the American government's imagination. These were ethnic Albanians living in Serbia. So it was a group, yes, for instance, a group with a different, with a uniqueness about them. But it was not like the Crimea. It was not like Eastern Ukraine, where these are people with a totally different culture than West Ukraine, and other parts of Ukraine. And at the same time, we're being threatened by the current government of Kiev because they're being ethnically Russian. The people of Serbia, the government of Serbia is not threatening these people for being Albanian. Literally, the flag of Kosovo is a picture of the outline of Kosovo with a bunch of stars around it on a blue banner. That's how unique Kosovo is. It's not really a real country, but the United States, it was a attempt to further balkanize the region, and they've been doing that ever since 1980. They've been working heavily towards that, I think one of the things they do fear is that a strong Serbia working with a strong Russia, may perhaps Serbia with their with their former territories, those former countries that were part of Yugoslavia, working together with Russia. They one thing that fears America strongly is Slavic brotherhood to the fullest. Russia and Serbia working together in a strong relationship. And it's funny how they've been able to kind of keep Serbia on the fence, is that they're not really quite willing to go to the European Union. They're not really quite willing to support Russia, but they kind of sit on the fence. And the current government of Serbia is pretty much like that. They're just like a half and half. I think that's another thing that when it comes to why they've done so much maneuvering in East Ukraine, in Ukraine, all across Eastern Europe over the last years, why they supported people like Saakashvili, is they stabilize regions, and they destabilize the Middle East, they destabilize the Slavic region, Russia, Ukraine, all these countries, East Europe. They destabilize South America. They destabilize Africa. They don't want one region to get too strong, because one region getting too strong could challenge America's hegemonic influence over a lot of the world. And it's like that's why they tried so hard. That's why they killed Gaddafi, because he was going to bring unity to Africa. He was working very strongly towards it, and it seemed like he was going to be successful. That's why they work so hard to balkanize Eastern Europe. They try so hard to sponsor right-wing dictators in Latin America, because they don't want a strong Latin America. They want a weak Latin America. They want a Latin America of they want a Latin America divided and repressed, like they had under Operation Condor during the 1970s, 1980s, 1990s. I hope what people take away from the show is definitely the situation in East Ukraine is dire, and people need to spread this information. That's the very minimum they can do, to share with their Facebook friends. Just like how people have taken a big concern about Syria. This is another civil war that is of large magnitude that people need to pay attention to. And in Yemen, it was a similar circumstance. It was kind of like with Ukraine. I find it similar. They're both civil wars that went under the radar, and also there's an American footprint. It seems like with all these wars in the Middle East and all these wars around the world, there's a Zionist American, maybe even a Saudi footprint on all of them. In Yemen, it's the sponsoring of the Hadi government and the terrorists that back the Hadi government that ultimately that's the American footprint there. And there's even the ISIS was a big force in Yemen. All around the world, the world is facing the same circumstance. The world's facing the same situation. Is that it's the New World Order, I think, losing its grip, and that's why they're being so desperate right now. As more countries, it seems like they take out one, but then two more pop up against them. And they're, it's like what happened in the Middle East is that they wanted to take out Iraq, Afghanistan, Iran, and that'd pretty much be the end of it, and Syria. But no, they took out those countries. They took out Iran, Afghanistan, but Syria and Iran's still standing there, and now Yemen and Iraq are against them. So now they have their task became bigger. And in South America, originally they just wanted to take out, Chavez was where the root of it was, of the Bolivarian revolution, of the pink tide, the socialist sweep to the left. And then when Hugo Chavez, he inspired other countries to follow along with him. Now it's like the entire continent. That little fire that was the revolution in Venezuela is now an entire continent. It's so, I have a lot of hope that when it comes to, it seems like in recent years things have not been going the way of the Rothschild, Rockefeller, your Brzezinski, these despicable men that ultimately are, pulling the strings are a major part of that string pulling. Things are no longer, it's no longer the 1980s or 1970s where it seemed like, things all around the world, the United States had their hand, in South America, the United States' hand was there. The United States' hand was all over, Europe, everything was going their way with the collapse of the Soviet Union. they were able to place in their pro-Western oligarchs in Kordosky, Berezovsky, all these other ones. By the way, you think when it comes to Poroshenko, do you think that as an oligarch there in Ukraine, do you think that he had connections with some of the other oligarchs in Eastern Europe? For example, do you think he was talking with some of the? Do you think that he was tied in with the Russian oligarchs that are notorious? Kordosky and Berezovsky, all these other ones that profited off the collapse of the Soviet Union. Do you think Poroshenko was from that same class of oligarchs?
Well, definitely, of course, yes. There's no doubt about that. And he connected not only to Russian oligarchs, but it's all the same world corporation establishment, They all connected. I'm sure most of Poroshenko's money in the United States Bank. That's how they basically control it all, And he's actually, I don't know if you know this part, but during this time, after he became president, he's the only person in Ukraine who became richer, and not only richer, but he became richer 3 times. So imagine this, the country, the Ukraine as a country, got much poorer. People got virtually poor, but he's the president and he got richer.
Well, yeah, now they have the economic crisis, but yet it's like the way that it always is across the world when you have these billionaires that oftentimes is that, the country suffers, the people suffer, but they thrive throughout from the chaos. That the Wall Street, they thrive when, in 2009, they got richer, they got their bailouts and everything. And really, a lot of people say that the economy recovered under Barack Obama, but really the economy never really recovered, not fully at least. And I think that it's still very unstable. And, while we have the numbers of the Dow and, what these big corporate executives are making, ultimately the people of America are still struggling to find jobs. The people of America are still struggling to make ends meet. We still have wages here, abysmal. People get paid $8 an hour. In some places, still $7.25 an hour, when that's what it costs to eat lunch. It's like it's starting to cost an hour wages just to eat lunch. This is starting to sound like the third world. This is supposed to be a first world country, and at the same time, also with the health.
Basically, like people working for food. Basically,
it's like it's like what the stories, like in a lot of times this would be common in South America or something where people work off an hour wages to get a hamburger or something like that. But that's what's starting to cost for people here in America to eat. It's starting to cost an hour's wages to get a lunch, 3 hours. If you count all 3 meals a day, which you're probably not eating the people that are on $7.25 wages. And people think that's only teenagers that are in high school, they're just looking for extra money that are on these minimum wage jobs. Actually 25% of all fast food workers have a 4-year degree or more. A lot of these people and 56% of all fast food workers have a family. So these people are not just, some teenager. They're not just somebody looking for a little extra money. And that's in the fast food industry. There's also many other jobs that pay minimum or very close to minimum, $9, $10 an hour. A lot of times for excruciatingly hard work and for long hours. These people, $7.25. That's not going to cut it really anywhere. I'll tell you that is that even $10 an hour, in most states won't cut it. Maybe if you're a single man with no family, but with a family, it's that with both parents working, it's going to be very, very difficult. In Ukraine, what I've heard is that it's having a big problem with inflation, right? There's a big problem with inflation in Ukraine, right? That's what I've heard, is that it's cost ridiculous amounts now to buy food, stuff like that, prices are going up overnight.
Well, not only the price of food got much higher, everything got higher. First of all, because of huge inflation, enormous inflation. Second of all, because the regime rising prices for the cost of living, for the fuel, for the electricity. So people literally surviving, especially the elderly. Now the usual salary in Ukraine is about $50 or $70 a month. So imagine how you could survive on this money if only, for example, for your apartment, you have to pay like $40 a month. Situation is really gruesome.
Yeah, that's definitely definitely crazy. Yeah, how things can change like that. And, people in Colombia, they had a pretty big problem with inflation recently. It's like it becomes like hyperinflation. And, you've seen examples where countries, 1 trillion times inflation over a matter of a few years. In Germany, they had it went from 4.3 marks to $1 to 4.3 trillion marks to $1, and people were literally using money as for their fires and to keep warm at night. That's how worthless it was to them, and using it to decorate their walls. By the way, I think this is going to be where the cut for the show, for the recording tomorrow. We can stay on air for a little bit longer. However, this is where UCY TV's probably cutoff mark is going to be. So thanks everyone who tuned in tonight to UCY.tv. Thanks everyone for listening to this recording, and catch you next week, Sunday at 9 o'clock Eastern Time. This is your host, Chris J. And thanks, Jules, as well, for everything that you do for the network and making this show possible. Always give a shout-out to you, and you're the best, Jules. And thanks everyone else that tuned in from Stable Radio, where this is currently live. All shows can be found in the archives either here at Blog Talk Radio, or the best way is go to www.ucy.tv and look in Voice of Rebellion Radio, just have like shows. Scroll up, Voice of Rebellion Radio will pop up on one of the many shows, and there's many other shows to check out. I personally recommend Tuesdays, 9 o'clock Eastern Time, primer time with Michael, my bud. Give his show sometime check out especially if you're into guns. He's got all the knowledge that you'll need to know. And by the way, so I remember there were big protests that were happening like a year or a couple of years ago, I think. They were happening in Kiev against Poroshenko. What happened with that? Did they, why the people stop protesting or just no longer being covered?
When exactly that happened? Can you be more specific?
I saw it. Maybe it was the whole thing with the let me pull it up. I remember there was some marches that were happening or whatever. I think it was with the nationalists. I think there was talk about there was internal fighting. There was I know there was on top of people also angry about on top of the right-wing protesters, there was also some other protesters that were protesting Poroshenko over corruption. But I might be mistaken. Let me look it up right now. Yeah, I mean, I would think that there'd definitely be people protesting, at least. I mean, it may not in large numbers, but you think that some people would have realized that they've been duped by this current government and would be out on the streets angry about it, kind of like what happened in, what's happened in some other countries where, like in Egypt, even though that ultimately that got controlled as well. After the Muslim Brotherhood took over in 2011, people were protesting in 2012 and 2013 because they realized what the CIA had did to them, and that the CIA had just replaced one American puppet with another American puppet. But ultimately, I think that Sisi became another puppet. This is, that's also one way of that the MO of the United States is that they, the CIA, that they control the opposition. The best way to control the opposition is to be the opposition. I'm always glad to have all you on here, have all you listening on this show. And next week, might be having another guest. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Stay vigilant, stay informed. Also, we're going to definitely keep our eyes on Syria after the strikes that happened this week, and what seems to be a major move towards the war with Syria and Iran taken by the Trump administration. Hopefully, that's not the case. Thanks, everyone, and good night.
Nobody can stop it. Malcolm Little, when he knelt before Elijah Muhammad, that commented, kill the dinosaurs, changing the earth. They love to criticize, they always say I changed for the worse, like prescription pills when you
You are listening to UCY.tv. Why don't you stick around for more awesome radio?
Nathan Fraser Show, episode number 64, Landon